Breaking news on CBS Sports HQ, and it's in college football. Arch Manning has committed to Texas. Manning is a five-star recruit, the #1 player in the class of 2023. He just visited Austin this past weekend following trips to Georgia and Alabama, but he has landed with the Texas Longhorns and coach Steve Sarkisian. Arch Manning taking to Twitter, making it official, saying committed to the University of Texas, and of course using that famous hashtag, Hook'em. All right, let's welcome in our Chip Patterson. Now breaking this down, Arch Manning has officially committed to Texas. Are you surprised by this decision? What was your initial reaction to this?
I was surprised by the timing. I thought that we were going to see the dead period, which starts next Monday and runs till July 23rd, to be a time that Arch Manning was going to get together with his family and really set a timetable. Because if there was any prospect in recent recruiting history who could take his time with making his commitment when all coaches want you to go ahead and commit now, it would be Arch Manning. So this is absolutely huge for Texas. You know, that's the first thing, the obvious thing. But it's also a little bit surprising that he's going to go ahead and do it right on the heels of that official visit. You know, he went to visit Georgia, got the pictures in the pads, got the fans all excited. Went to Alabama, pictures in the pads, got the fans all excited. The visit to Texas reportedly went very, very well. I had no idea it was going to go this well, that Arch Manning, a prospect who could have taken as much time as he wanted to make his decision about where he would play college football, for him to turn right around and commit to Steve Sarkisian. The impact of that visit and what Steve Sarkisian and the Texas staff have been selling clearly worked for Arch Manning and his family, and this is a program-changing commitment for the Longhorns.
You just mentioned it there, a program-changing commitment for the Longhorns. So what do you think the immediate impact will be? Will this change things around right away, or is this something that might take time to build?
It will change things right away in the 2023 recruiting cycle, because now as Steve Sarkisian looks to fill out his class, especially on the offensive side of the ball, you know what he gets to sell? Arch Manning. When he's going to wide receivers, when he's going to offensive linemen, when he's going to running backs, he gets to say you get to be in an offense with a potentially generational quarterback talent. And so you, yes, get the impact of 2023. You know that when he comes on campus, he's going to have an impact in terms of being able to raise the level of play in the quarterback room right away. Now, what will it do in 2022? Not major impact, but guess what? We've got Quinn Ewers, another elite quarterback prospect who's going to be taking over that offense. And I do think there has to be some part of this where Steve Sarkisian is able to go to Arch Manning and say, look, at the system that I am setting up for another quarterback that does have dual threat capability, that does have the ability to run a wide open offense and be very prolific and very, very productive. It's like with what Quinn Ewers is expected to do with Texas in 2022, that had to be some of the selling point that got Arch Manning to commit to the Longhorns.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned it there. So they got Quinn Ewers, who's the #1 recruit and #1 quarterback just 2 years ago. So what does that mean for him?
For him, he still could be in the NFL draft soon, before Arch Manning is maybe even particularly ready to go and take that quarterback job. Remember, Quinn Ewers started his college career back at Ohio State. So his 3 years out of high school is going to come up before Arch Manning is deep into his college career. I think that if you go into the 2023 season and you do have both of those quarterbacks in the room, you've got the best case scenario where there is going to be a little bit of time, there is going to be a little bit of runway before you really hand the reins over. It is not often that these generational prospects are going to be given that week one true freshman starting job. It is a little bit better, I think, for the player and certainly for the coaching staff to know that you've got a proven option above them to let them get their feet settled. And so I think that there's no major competition right away. Instead, Texas fans are looking at the offensive line class that Steve Sarkisian has signed in the recent recruiting cycles. They're looking at Quinn Ewers. They're looking at the wide receiver position and the work the Longhorns have done on the transfer portal. And you think that with Arch Manning on board, there is going to be all gas, no brakes, high scoring offenses at Texas for what, 3-4 years to come? And that is a great feeling for a program that will be moving to the SEC very soon.
You look at Texas as a whole, so they had Ewers, now they're going to have Arch Manning in 2023. What does that say about Sark and what he's been able to do with this program and then just his recruiting in general?
What I've heard is that this is really about relationships, and that Steve Sarkisian has done a fantastic job, and his entire offensive staff, of really making sure that, while they didn't have the national championships that Alabama and Georgia did, while they didn't have the recent run of success that Alabama and Georgia did, they were able to sell the future, and they were able to sell themselves. And look, the Longhorns don't even have any recent success under Steve Sarkisian. This is a team that went 5-7 last year and lost to Kansas at home. This is all about off-field and the future, because there is nothing in recent Texas history on the field that says that this is going to be where you're going to win a national championship. There's nothing about even just last season that says that Steve Sarkisian is going to be able to lead Texas to being back. But what Steve Sarkisian has been able to do on the recruiting trail, and especially here with the recruitment of Arch Manning, is say, I understand that we don't have what Alabama and Georgia do in terms of recent success, but with you on board, with the people that we are assembling in Austin, we are going to be able to lead the Longhorns back into competition for national championships. And clearly that sales pitch is working. So this is massive in terms of Steve Sarkisian, what he's been able to do, the relationships he's able to build, and what he's able to sell about the future of Longhorns football.
It's all about relationships and family. That's right. Thanks so much, Chip, for joining us here on HQ with this breaking news. Arch Manning has committed to Texas. Now, for more on this, you got to check out the Cover 3 podcast. I'm sure there is going to be an emergency pod coming in. The Cover 3 College Football Podcast, a perfect call for any diehard fans. Tune in and follow along today. We've got breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. Arch Manning has committed to Texas. Manning, a 5-star recruit, #1 player in the class of 2023. He just visited Austin this past weekend following trips to Georgia and Alabama earlier this month. But he has landed with the Texas Longhorns and Coach Steve Sarkisian. We take a look at the recruiting rankings for the 2023 class, and you see Texas right there now with a 5-star recruit in Arch Manning. They have 5 4-star recruits also in that class at number 19. I'm sure that there are going to be many more recruits jumping on board now that Arch Manning is signed and committed to Texas. And for more on that, let's bring in Steve Wiltfong, Director of Football Recruiting for 24/7 Sports. Now, I know you just spoke with Arch Manning's head coach at Isidore Newman. Tell me a little bit about what Coach had to say in that conversation.
Well, from the, Coach Nelson Stewart said from the beginning of this recruitment, from the first Zoom that Arch Manning had with Sark, it was a real connection between the two. And he said that he thought the authenticity and the way they got to know Arch, and then the extension of A.J. Milwee, the quarterback's coach, and just how aligned him and Steve Sarkisian were, and even Kyle Flood in the run game. All those things really made Arch feel comfortable. And I know for a fact he took 4 visits to Texas. Important factors in his decision were, a place where he feels like he can play in big games and win big games, play for a coach that's going to develop him to be the best player that he can be. But I think also he wants to have a great college experience. I think he was looking for a great college town. I think he really loved Austin and the experiences he had within the city of Austin and what that offers a college student in general. So I think Texas checked all the boxes. He took 4 visits to Texas, took 4 visits to Alabama, took 4 visits to Georgia, and now he's in the fold for Steve Sarkisian and company. And it's a big commitment for them because he was the only quarterback they offered and recruited and talked to the entire 23 cycle.
Obviously showing that he was their #1 pick when it came to who they want in 2023. You just talked about the commitment there. Is this the biggest commitment in Texas history?
I don't know. Time will tell. It's certainly the most newsworthy one, with the power of the name that Arch brings to the table with the last name Manning, the Kennedys of high school football, the Kennedys of football in general are the Mannings. So certainly from a news standpoint, but I mean, look, Texas has landed #1 players before. They've landed #1 quarterbacks before, and that's a program that we've seen win a national championship. This is one that keeps the trajectory of the program going in the right direction. I think that when you look at what Texas did in the transfer portal last year, what they did on the recruiting trail, they went out and signed the best offensive line class in the country. They signed a terrific front 7 class on defense. And now they're backloading here in 2023. They go out and land the #1 player in the country, another #1 quarterback in Arch Manning. So now you have Quinn Ewers, You have Arch Manning going into the same quarterback room. That's a pretty potent combination right there, in addition to the others that are already in that quarterback room as well. So I just think that the trajectory of this Texas program is very exciting. It already was, and now this 2023 class is really going to get rocking and rolling here with Manning in the fold.
We just had a list up there of the top 10 prospects on the class of 2023. How much better is Arch than the other quarterbacks in that 2023 class?
Well, I actually think that, the race for the number one quarterback in the country is certainly exciting as well. Arch is our number one guy right now, but that it's not his paragraph and then all the others. There's some really talented arms. Malachi Nelson, who's committed to USC, Nico Iamaleava, who's committed to Tennessee. And you have guys like Dante Moore and Jaden Rashada, who are uncommitted right now. There's several quarterbacks vying for a fifth star in this class. And Arch Manning is the guy at the top right now, but those others aren't too far behind.
We're looking at the rankings, of course, at that 2023 class. Where does this put Texas's class in those rankings? How much movement do you expect to see from this change?
Well, I would imagine that he's going to bring some guys with him. I gave a 24/7 Sports crystal ball to Jonte Cook after this news. I think that they'll land one of the top 10 receivers in the country, in-state guy, and Jonte Cook. Ultimately, they have a great chance to land one of the best running backs in the country, Cedric Baxter, out of the state of Florida. And again, this is going to make Texas a little bit more exciting on the trail with Arch Manning now in the fold doing some peer recruiting.
We were just talking to our Barrett Salee, and he said the players are the strongest recruiters. So you mentioned a couple guys there. Can you give us a couple more that might be following him to Texas in that class of 2023?
Oh, man, Texas is in the middle of it for a lot of guys, and they've had some very busy recruiting weekends this past here in June. They've already committed his tight end, Will Randall. They have speedy receiver Ryan Niblett in the fold. And this is going into a pretty big recruiting weekend for them, where they have the number one linebacker in the country, Anthony Hill, the number 2 player in the state. He headlines a big official visit weekend this weekend for Texas. They're trying to land offensive lineman Connor Stroh from in-state. They're in it for a lot of guys on defense, Malik Muhammad, Hunter Osborne, to name a couple. Michael Harrison Pilot is a dynamic receiver, two-way athlete that visited Texas last weekend that had a great visit. So, Texas, they're in on a lot of guys, and maybe this is a recruiting win that allows them to sneak in on some guys that maybe they were down the list on, but now Texas just got a little more exciting with the trajectory of their program.
Certainly did. Now, Steve, we were talking to a couple other people before we jumped on with you, and everyone seems to be a little surprised about the timing of this announcement. Are you surprised, or do you think it falls in line with what you were expecting?
Well, there was never a set timetable whenever he was ready. He took 4 visits to each of his finalists. So from that regard, what more could he have possibly seen? I think that there was some talk, if you talk to Arch or you talk to his dad or you talk to his coach, that they thought that this could maybe go into the fall. They weren't going to be held hostage by a decision before senior season, and alluded to, hey, maybe we want to see some teams play in the fall. But at this point, it doesn't surprise me that he made his decision, with the amount of times that he was able to go out and see his 3 finalists.
Of course, that Manning Passing Academy coming up very soon, too, so I'm sure he'll be talking in some of the guys' ears about, hey, why don't we go take a look at Texas there? Steve Wilfong, thanks so much for joining us here on HQ with the breaking news. Arch Manning going to Texas. He's going to be a Longhorn, already with the hashtag Hook'em on his social media accounts. And for more on this, you got to check out 24/7 Sports. You can stay up to date with all the college sports news, recruiting, transfers, and more. 247sports.com.
We're following breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. Arch Manning has committed to Texas. Manning, the 5-star recruit, the number 1 player in the class of 2023, is a Longhorn. He just visited Austin this past weekend following trips to Georgia and Alabama earlier this month, but he has landed with Texas and coach Steve Sarkisian. Manning tweeting it out as well. As you take a look, committed to the University of Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Virginia, all teams that were certainly hoping to have his commitment, but instead he's going to the Lone Star State. All right, let's bring in Barrett Salee for more on this. Barrett, first I'll get your reaction to this news that Manning has committed to the Texas Longhorns.
Yeah, I really wasn't surprised. Maybe a little surprised that it happened today and that he didn't wait a little bit closer to the season to build some more recruiting momentum for Texas. But from all accounts, his visit to Austin was top notch. I think he understood and welcomed what that staff was selling him, and he feels at home there. So I wasn't necessarily surprised he went to Texas. That felt like the way that it had been leaning for the last month or so. And it's not often that Alabama misses out on its top target, but and Georgia misses out on its top target. But I think right now, when you look at the trajectory of the programs, Manning wants to build something, not just step into ready-made success.
And when you look at it, I mean, you talk about the timing. Chip mentioned that as well. Do you have any insight into why he would just make the decision so quickly? Do you think it's about just getting it out of the way and focusing on the football aspect at this point?
Well, I definitely think that's part of it, but these are orchestrated commitments. Every single one. We saw Ohio State this week got 3 commitments from wide receivers. So these coaches do orchestrate these things, and there is the Manning Passing Academy coming up later this month. So maybe that's a chance for him to go there and sell the Texas brand to some high school kids, and obviously media days around the corner. So I think when you look at the way these camps are set up, Elite 11 coming up as well, you want to go and sell Texas to a bunch of guys, because the players are always and always have been the strongest recruiters on a staff. It's not the assistant coaches. It's not the head coaches. The players who are committed, that have relationships with other players in their class, are the strongest recruiters. So now Texas has a ton of momentum. So am I surprised it happened? No. I thought it would happen a little bit later in the summer, but certainly before fall camp. And so, I think Art right now is Texas's guy. He's Texas's biggest recruiter. And if you're Sark, you tell him, hey, buddy, go out there and sell this program to everybody you can, because there's going to be a big reason to follow Art to Texas. If he's going to have the success that a lot of folks think, a lot of wide receivers, a lot of skill players will be coming.
I wanted to follow up just, Barrett, with the fact that the timing is happening now. So how beneficial is this for Texas in terms of their recruiting to have it happen now?
Well, it's huge. It's huge for Sarkisian, who's on the sort of the hot seat. And it's huge for Texas to sort of sell the future of that program. Chip mentioned it last segment. They were 5-7. They lost to Kansas. They were a complete disaster last year in Sark's first year. Now, they were at a little bit of a personnel disadvantage. I get that. Their quarterback situation didn't work out the way they had thought. But this is a team now. You got Steve Sarkisian to get some stars, including Quinn Ewers, to transfer, Jaleel Billingsley. And now you're going to build some prospects, some high school prospects on top of that. So I think for Sarkisian, it's huge, because faith in him among the Texas fan base has been rejuvenated, even though he hasn't coached a game since the end of last season. So the hope, the future, the fact that Texas might be back. We always joke about that phrase, that Texas is back, but I think right now it's safe to say that Texas is a recruiting power, and that it is back in that regard, both through the transfer portal and through high school recruiting. So that certainly helps calm some fears about Sarkisian and allows the fan base to know, hey, we're going to get the Jimmies and the Joes. The X's and O's might come. It might not be the best staff in terms of X's and O's, but clearly they're capable and really adept at getting the Jimmies and the Joes on campus.
Yeah, it may be too soon to say Texas is back, but we can say they're at least back in the conversation when it comes to recruiting. The timing of this is something obviously we're going to be focusing on because of the fact that it kind of just came out of the blue. But from an NIL perspective, I mean, this seems like pretty good timing in order to capitalize on those NIL deals.
Oh, yeah. They were probably happening before, because shocking that tampering does happen a little bit. But now that he's in Texas, a lot of these guys are going to start throwing money at him. The collectives, the local dealerships, the local businesses, the state businesses in the state of Texas, because we know about that fan base and how wide ranging it is. So I don't think there's any doubt right now that whether it's discussed or it's under the table, because technically you're not supposed to recruit with NIL, that Arch Manning will be set up quite nicely from a financial standpoint once he arrives in Austin. So there's no doubt that it's a factor. But I think also when you look at how other recruits are going to look at Arch and think, wow, he got all this money. Quinn Ewers has got all these NIL deals. Xavier Worthy this year, their wide receiver, has some really good NIL deals as well that they're gonna hop on board. And look, we already know Texas's laws, the state laws in Texas, allow for some more lenient NIL deals. That's why Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban got into it last month. Texas can use those too and use those to its advantage, and I think it's pretty clear that they are.
When you look at Quinn Ewers, who's there, Arch Manning, who's coming, I mean, really, the graphic says it. Is Texas big enough for two number one QBs? What does this, we asked Chip this question, I'll ask you, Barrett, what does this mean for Ewers to have Manning committing to Texas?
It should light a fire under him. It should light a fire under him. Any championship quarterback likes to be pushed. Any championship program likes to have that culture of competition throughout the course of the entire offseason, not just during fall camp and spring practice and during the season. So, yeah, Quinn Ewers is looking in his rearview mirror, probably thinking, wow, am I only going to get 1 year? But I don't think there's any doubt that Arch Manning, when he steps foot on campus next year, he will compete and contend for that starting job no matter what Quinn Ewers does this year. But this is something that Sark, I think, learned from Nick Saban. You have to stack five-star quarterbacks on five-star quarterbacks, just like Kirby Smart did when he got to Georgia with Justin Fields and Jake Fromm. Nick Saban has done this consistently in Alabama. That coaching tree, that's the way they go about their business. And in an age of a transfer portal, look, if Quinn Ewers loses his job in 2023, later, he can bail, and that's okay because he'll find a spot. He found one this time with Texas. He can find one another go-round. So I think for Quinn, if you want to be a successful quarterback, if you want to be groomed to be an NFL draft pick, you need to have somebody behind you pushing because it makes both contenders better.
Yeah, that's the thing. Two top quarterbacks pushing each other, certainly an ideal situation. Barrett Sallee, one of our college football minds here on CBS Sports HQ. We're going to be on the Cover 3 podcast talking about this absolutely for sure. An emergency pod is likely being set up right now to discuss Arch Manning's commitment to Texas. You can download and follow the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcast audio. Following breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ in college football, where Arch Manning has committed to Texas. Manning, a five-star recruit. He's the number one player in the class of 2023. Just visited Austin this past weekend, following trips to Georgia and Alabama earlier this month, and that was enough. He has landed with the Texas Longhorns and Coach Steve Sarkisian. Big get for Sark, who goes into his second season with the Longhorns. And for Manning, you take a look at the overall rankings for the 2023 class. I mean, in 3 seasons at Isidore Newman, he's passed for over 6,300 yards. He's had 742 yards rushing. He's thrown 81 touchdowns and run for another 19 touchdowns. So you can see why he is top of the class. All right, for more on this, let's go out to our guys at 24/7 Sports, Josh Pate and Bud Elliott. Gentlemen, I'll start. Just your reaction, continue the conversation as Arch Manning commits to Texas.
Yeah, Jeremy, Bud, just when you thought it was safe to say the word vacation, here we go. It's the middle of June, and Arch Manning to Texas. There are several different ways that we can go with this. So let's just start with overall, this is going to send ripple effects throughout the entirety of college football. Georgia was in this, Alabama was in this, but ultimately, you probably agree with me. I don't know that there was any program out there that thought they needed Arch Manning more than the University of Texas, and they got him.
Correct. Steve Sarkisian's first year at Texas last year did not go particularly well on the field. And they did have a strong recruiting class, but just in terms of jump-starting a program, Texas has won national titles in our lifetime, but they haven't done so recently, whereas Alabama and Georgia have. Getting a guy like Arch Manning, who is the top recruit of all time in terms of fame, notoriety, it's just so big for Texas recruiting, for Sarkisian's tenure there at Texas, as they matriculate to the SEC in the coming years. You just can't overstate how big this is.
Yeah, I don't think it should be lost, by the way. We're talking all the time in the future tense about OU, but about Texas and about that eventual move to the SEC. One of the questions, as recently as last week, I had it asked on my show, I know you guys on Cover 3 have talked about it a lot, is how much bump may you see in recruiting going from the Big 12 to the SEC? Well, if this is an early indication, Texas handled themselves very well in this recruitment. They went up against SEC heavyweights. And it's such a huge deal because it signifies not only are we going to be serious at quarterback for the foreseeable future, and they had gone out and gotten Quinn Ewers in the transfer portal as well, but as you well know, covering recruiting at the micro level, This is such a big deal for complementary players, perimeter skill players, running backs, but you may even have corners and safeties that want to play with Arch Manning.
Can you imagine being a class of 2023 recruit? And I know Arch Manning isn't big on social media, at least right now, although he did tweet out his commitment today. You're going to take that call if Arch Manning calls you and say, hey, I know you're committed to Alabama. I know you're committed to Georgia. I turn those schools down. Come check out what Texas has to offer. It's Arch Manning. He's the most famous recruit of all time, our number one overall player in the class. And that Texas offense, Josh, is going to be dynamite. Because let's go back just 5-6 months ago now to when Texas signed the number one offensive line class in the country. When Arch arrives on campus, that offensive line class will be second-year players. That's going to be a great line to play behind.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting documentaries, if you could really get all access on this recruitment, would have been the negative recruiting pitch, if there was one against Texas, because you have proven results at Alabama. Georgia now has proven results, and they could probably sell him on, hey, and we haven't even had a quarterback of your caliber yet. Whereas at Texas, there's a lot of new. There's a lot of fresh out of the wrapper. You can still smell the newness on the program, and there's a lot of remains to be seen there. But when Steve Sarkisian came in, I just wonder, what was the tipping point? What was that final domino? Was it, here's what I did with Mac Jones? Was it, come make your own legacy here instead of being part of something that's already been established? But at the very least, when you talk about the heavyweight recruiting battles that are still to come for Texas, boy, you'll look back on this one for a long time and say that may be where it started.
Let's go back to the hiring of David Cutcliffe by Texas, right? It's my belief that the Mannings probably got their blessing from Cutcliffe about Sark's offense. To me, there's some questions about Steve Sarkisian as the head coach. I think those are fair, but there are no questions about his ability to run a great offense and put up points. And clearly the Mannings value Cutcliffe's input a lot. Remember, he was Peyton's offensive coordinator at the University of Tennessee, and he was Eli's head coach at Ole Miss. So if you're an offensive player, there's really no downside to going to play for Texas.
Yeah. We'll have a lot of coverage of this and more things on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel today, but I kind of wanted to look ahead now. Texas is coming into this season. In one hand, they're listed among the favorites in the Big 12. I think the over-under at Caesars right now is 9 in the win total category. Do you think, if anything, there's some importance on this year, giving a proven result on the field that may impact not just Arch Manning, but other commitments that could very well hinge on how the Horns do on the field this fall?
I think it is important that Texas not necessarily win the Big 12 this year, but I think it's important that they at least show some progress. You don't want to give Arch Manning a reason to decommit. And not that I think he would. I think that family's been very deliberate about their process. They've been pretty buttoned up. It has not been a media circus, despite our best efforts to make it one. But if they were to go 6-6 or something, you might have some serious doubts about Sark's future there in Austin. So I do think it's important that Texas, at the very least, contend for the Big 12. Be in the race to make it to the Big 12 title game in those final weeks. Show some real progress. Give Arch Manning a reason to believe that thing really is on track with his help.
Yeah, Jeremy, one more thing to remember as we wrap it up here on our end. This is the transfer portal era. And so now and moving forward, if you're Texas, and not only this year, but in the coming years, you're trying to get in that portal and maybe you want to pull off a duplicate of getting Isaiah Nayer like they did from Wyoming this past year. They want to get a compliment to a Bijan Robinson once he heads off to the NFL. Boy, it sure makes it a whole lot more attractive when you can go out there and say, oh, by the way, we've got this guy named Arch Manning. Have you ever heard of him? For Bud Elliott, Josh Pate here. We'll have plenty more coverage on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel all afternoon. Until then, back to you guys.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate the input. Certainly a big day for the University of Texas, the Longhorns fans. And of course, as Josh mentioned, they're going to be talking about this all day long over on their YouTube channel. You can also follow Late Kick with Josh Pate Thursdays and Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, live on YouTube and Facebook.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.